Hello and welcome to Energy Secrets for Conscious Leaders. Today my guest is Arjuna Ardagh. Arjuna is a radical brilliance coach, writer and public speaker, and he was the original founder of Awakening Coaching. He's trained more than 2,000 people to become Awakening coaches over the last 25 years. Arjuna is the author of 9 books, including the 2005 #1 national bestseller, The Translucent Revolution, featured in O Magazine. Better Than Sex is the complete introduction to Awakening Coaching. He also co-authored Conscious Men with John Gray. Arjuna has been a speaker at conferences all over the world and has appeared on TV, radio, and in print media in 12 countries. He's spoken at Google and at the United Nations. Arjuna is a member of the Transformational Leadership Council. He lives with his wife, Shamali, in Nevada City, California. Welcome, Arjuna.
Thank you, Kathy. Good to see you again.
Good to see you. And, we were talking just before about the difficulty of leaders getting caught in distractions and getting enrolled in games they didn't create. And you gave me this great question that we're going to explore, which is, are you playing the game that your soul remembers?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Want to launch into that right away?
Why not? Unless there was something else that came to mind.
No, we can go there. Yeah. So I think it's probably best to launch into this through a little story. A story from, it's a sort of, what do you call, like a folk tale, I think you call it, like a story that's been handed down. And this story actually is from India, and it's a little politically incorrect because it takes us back to a time when of monarchy, when the monarchy was handed down only to a male, so that's the context of the story. So there's this old king, you see, there's an old king, and the king has no heir. Now, I don't mean that he's balding like me. I mean, he's got no male progeny to take over the kingdom. So, and as I said, in old times, you couldn't have the kingdom inherited by a queen, like in England today. So he's getting ready to retire and go off to the forest. So because he has no heir, he calls his prime minister to him. And he says, I have no heir, so I want you to go out into all the villages and small towns in the whole kingdom and announce that the next king will be selected by interview, not by hereditary. So they send all the, what do they call, the pages out with the trumpets, and they go out into the market towns. They go, hear ye, hear ye, we're going to select the next king by interview. Everybody should come to the palace on Thursday who would like to be the king. So everybody goes, oh, wow, I want to be the king. That sounds amazing. So on Thursday, there's quite a good number of people have gathered at the palace. Well, of course, they're let into the palace, but they're not looking so great. They've got very tousled hair, kind of dirty dreadlocks, and, and they've got all sorts of little animals living on them, and, very dirty rags, because it's a kingdom, in an old time. So it's very feudal. So people living in the small villages, they were quite poor. So first thing is, they are all taken to the royal bathhouse because the king wants to treat them well. So they're taken to the royal bathhouse, they're scrubbed, they get a nice haircut, shaved, they end up looking like Keanu Reeves, they all look amazing. They're sprayed, nice cologne, and they're given these great clothes of satin and silk and velvet, and everybody looks incredible. They really get cleaned up nicely. But then, of course, they're hungry, so they're taken to the royal banqueting hall, where there is a huge spread of incredible food. Just all you can eat of every. So there's every dish you can imagine from all over the world. A long tables going all down the wall. So they're eating, and then they're drinking, and they're eating more and drinking more and filling up their plates. And then in come the courtesans, so the royal courtesans come in, and they're all got these little bells, and they look beautiful. And so now these interview subjects who are now a little drunk, they're full of food, a little drunk, they dance with the courtesans, and they're getting a little frisky, and they're having the greatest time. Well, finally, it comes around to 9 o'clock in the night, and the guards come and say, everybody now must leave. So they try to grab, a leg of mutton or something to take home and wrap it up in these clothes. But then the guards say, no, 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 you cannot take anything away from this place. You can only leave in the rags you came in. You can't take anything from here. So they all leave together, and they're got their arms around each other as they're swaying down the street outside the palace, like, yeah, it's all, yeah. So they're leaving, feeling that they had a great time, So the king, meanwhile, has been waiting the whole day in his royal chambers. So he calls the prime minister. He said, what happened? Where are the people to have the interview? And the prime minister hangs his head and says, my lord, I am so sorry. But actually, everybody forgot why they came. Every single one of them forgot why they came. They got so caught up in all of the entertainment you provided and all of the pleasures. They got so caught up in the pleasures, they forgot their purpose in coming. And the king says that's very, very sad, because the pleasures that they enjoyed today, they only had for a day. And it was very fleeting. If even one of them had remembered his purpose in coming, he would have access to everything forever,
Such a good story.
So that's kind of my favorite teaching story, that human life, in my observation, I coach people in positions of influence. The biggest issue that human beings face, in my experience, is distraction. That is the number one detriment to living a truly meaningful, purposeful, fulfilling, rich life, is distraction. We get distracted. And generally speaking, we get distracted by what we could call exogenous influence. Now, exogenous, it's simply a fancy word to say things from the outside, things we did not create, things we got enrolled in. So a really good example would be social media. Unless you are Mark Zuckerberg or Jack Dorsey or something, you didn't create the platform. You didn't make up this game with the likes and the comments. You're participating in a game that someone else created, and you get wrapped up in it, and then you start, and it's all been orchestrated. So you keep going back to see if they liked your comment, so you get drawn into it. That's an exogenous game. It's not a game. It's hard to believe that anyone got born with a kind of sole mission to do really well in social media. It's an exogenous game, But there are multiple exogenous games. Ultimately, making money is an exogenous game, right? It is conceivable that someone like Warren Buffett, maybe his life purpose is to master currency, to master the feeling of enough. I don't know. But generally speaking, for most people, participating in the socioeconomic system is an exogenous game. It's one that we have to take care of. You can't ignore it or you'll starve. But if you do more than ignore it and actually get enrolled in the competitive nature of the game, you tend to lose connection with what is truly meaningful. Now, I'll just say one more thing about this, and then we can dialogue about it. That, we could ask, how do we know this? How do we know that there are exogenous, but also endogenous values? Endogenous values means things that you get from deep within yourself. And that requires some element of introspection, of meditation, of retreat, of something. So there are various ways to rediscover endogenous values. For example, I wouldn't wish this on anybody, but if you happen to have a near-death experience where your body actually dies for a couple of minutes and then is revived through electric shock or something, when people have a near-death experience, they are often able to report on what they experience. And people say that very quickly, just in that 2 minutes, they actually review their entire life, which is kind of amazing that you can just go through your whole life in that very short time span. And most people say with a near-death experience, I realized that I was climbing a ladder that was leaning against the wrong wall. You know, I was competing in games that were actually not relevant to me at all. And so the majority of people who have near-death experiences really realign their lives. It's very rare to hear anybody after an NDE saying, oh, I was spending way too much time on love. You know, like I was putting way too much energy into love and people close to me. That's very rare. You never really hear that. But you do hear people saying that they were putting way too much energy into trying to get famous, you know, trying to be recognized by people they don't know, or trying to make money in way in excess of their actual needs to be able to, you know, to have food and shelter and security. People will get hooked into trying to accumulate millions and millions of dollars, where it's no longer associated with having the resources you need to give your gift, you know. So this is really, you know, the word coaching, it means lots of things. You can be, these days, you can be any kind of coach, you know, wellness coach, there's a life coach, there's a relationship coach. So my role is I am a brilliance coach. I help people to rediscover why they're on the planet, the contribution they were born to make. Not everybody, it's not that it's like a huge grandiose thing for everybody. Some people who I coach discover they came on this planet to change the game for everybody. And I'm coaching several people like that now who know that they came here to change the course, to make a course correction that would affect everybody. Like, for example, Steve Jobs, obvious. You know, if you look at the movie of his life or read either of the authorized biographies, Steve Jobs clearly came here with a mission to change the game for everybody, to do with computing. He didn't do very well as a father or a husband, or in many ways, because he was so focused on his purpose, you know. Lynn Twist is one of the most prominent people in radical brilliance. She very clearly knows why she's here, and it's not just for her own needs. It's actually in service to the collective. So there are people who have this kind of global purpose. There are other people who have a more local purpose. Some people are born to be a great parent, and that's the most meaningful thing in their lives. That's so long as they do that well, it was a life well lived, you know. But for many of us, I would say the great majority, honestly, probably I would estimate somewhere in the like 98th percentile, most human beings have been completely hypnotized by exogenous values, completely and utterly hypnotized by what they've been told to like, what they've been told to buy, how they've been told to earn money to buy the things. And it takes quite a bit of energy to wake up and to recognize that actually for many of us, we are wasting our lives. We're wasting our opportunity at human birth because we've forgotten what is truly meaningful. When you rediscover that, when you rediscover what is truly meaningful for you, it's interesting because the things you were chasing exogenously often just fall into place. Money tends to take care of itself when you are completely on purpose, when you're totally on track, doing what you were meant to do and doing what your innermost essence calls you to do. Money tends to take care of itself. You tend to have great relationships with other people who are also on track. Your health tends to be in good shape because you have a high level of inspired energy, which is very good for your health. It's the opposite of depression, you know. So ironically, when you focus on your gift and mission, many of the things that we worry about take care of themselves.
Lovely. I think you actually, in that last bit, you've just answered a question that arose in my mind earlier on in what you were saying, because I was thinking about, you know, as you were talking about, you know, the all of the exogenous things that distract us. And yet then there's often a necessary side for that. For many people, particularly in business, there's a certain amount that they need to participate in the social media game, and a certain amount they have to participate in the money game. So the image that was coming to mind was of this sort of like finding a, you know, that knife edge where you can participate enough to support your purpose, but not fall into the distractions. And I think, and I was going to ask you about, you know, what are the secrets of actually finding that knife edge? And I think you've just answered that now, that walking that knife edge, the key to that is, you know, aligning with this, your purpose and your gifts. Is that correct?
Yeah. I mean, I think the main thing I would say regarding what you talked about, finding that balance, is like, good luck with that, because I actually work in Silicon Valley. I consult with people in leadership in Silicon Valley, and I'm particularly at the moment consulting with consulting in the area of being able to actually reinvent technology so that it is supportive to people instead of predatory. See, because right now, the tech industry, if you look at all of the players involved, it's nobody's fault, but the game is massively predatory. I mean, it's almost entirely predatory, which means you've got VCs, venture capitalists, who they're doing they're doing their job. They are trying to get 5x or 10x return on the investment of the funds they manage. Then you've got founders, you know, are probably the closest people within the tech world who have some kind of connection to vision. The founder has a vision of something, but then in order to go through what's required to get the venture capital and to found it all and to get noticed, the vision tends to easily go out of the window, because you just start competing in this predatory game. Then you've got coders, you know, you've got people very often it's young people. The coders are often in their 20s, people writing code who just get embroiled in this very, very high stress environment of trying to create algorithms to accomplish various things. The mental health statistics for people working in startup in tech is like alarming relative to the norm. You know, there's much higher levels of anxiety and depression than we consider normal. Then you've got, you know, a huge marketing force. I mean, you can't launch any app or website or anything without marketing the bejeekers out of it. And finally, you've got the end user, who often is being persuaded to adopt something they didn't even think of or know existed before they start to get persuaded that they need it. So it's a highly predatory game. And if you see the movie, The Social Dilemma, you know, that pulls back the curtain just a little bit on how much everyone is being played by commercial interests. So when you talk about finding the balance, I mean, I think you can only find the balance when you understand that you are participating in a highly predatory game. Unless you understand the extremely predatory nature of it, the attempt to maintain balance will be naive, you know.
Yeah.
Now there are platforms emerging like Circle.io, like to some degree, you know, Signal. There are environments emerging which have been set up in a different way, and that we're seeing this more and more. We're seeing the possibility of DAOs, decentralized organizations, decentralized autonomous organizations, which are not profit-making, you know, which are decentralized from the beginning, but these are in their very early stages. So in terms of participating in the game, yes, to some degree, it may be necessary to participate. But I would say it's, you know, massively important that decision about how much you are going to participate, that decision can be made really from deep within yourself. That the answer of how to position yourself in all this can come from the most awake part of you that remembers why you're here.
Yeah. Well, let's
because
talk more about that,
yeah,
that how
yeah,
people access that most awake part and keep it
yeah,
alive and in focus, because there's, that other aspect of, the distractions. And
yeah,
I'm interested in you using the word predatory for this, so like the nature of the modern world, and you reference Silicon Valley and the amount of competition, because the other thing that then comes in for me relevant to that is the difficulty, maybe for some, maybe for all, of maintaining authenticity, integrity, and all the issues that come up surrounding power in those predatory games too. So how do people really what's your advice to the clients you work with who are feeling out of alignment, out of integrity, out of authenticity, or just not in touch with that deep awake part of themselves?
Well, I remember very early on in my career, I suppose, very early on in the process of building skills to be able to help people, I had a mentor, a teacher. I had a guy who was a very, very highly accomplished group leader. He worked with groups, 20 people. And I can remember there was this woman in one of these groups who was pretty young, in her 20s probably. And she was complaining about something, with her relationship. And this guy who, this group leader, just completely took her down. I mean, he just listed for her all the manipulative, flirtatious games she was playing to kind of hook people in and then push them away. He just really rolled out her entire mechanism for manipulation of other people. And it just took, 5 or 10 minutes, and it was like razor sharp precise. And at the end of 10 minutes, she was like devastated. She was just like floored. And she said, "Oh my God," she said, "yeah, I mean, I feel completely exposed. Now what do I do?" And this guy who was something of a mentor to me, he said, awareness is 97% of the work, right? Awareness is 97% of the work. Like once you see something, once you see a dysfunctional pattern, it's going to wither and drop on its own. So I think that's a big part of what you're asking, is if we can just get ourselves into a disposition where we can realize that there are dimensions to you. And like I said, some people, they are shocked into this awareness through a near-death experience. For me, it was very much accelerated by the death of my son last year. My youngest son died. Yeah. He died, having his best day ever. It was not like the actual circumstances of his death were more sort of magical and heroic than tragic. I mean, he was unbelievably happy on the day of his death, but nevertheless he died. And it was, for me as his father, it's the worst thing you can probably go through, is to lose a child. It's like a freight train drives through your life. It just knocks you over. I couldn't do anything for months. I was just rendered completely dysfunctional. I couldn't do anything. But what happened out of that, it did become a really powerful wake up to what is actually important in life and what are we just distracted by, So it could be a near-death experience. It could be the death of someone close to you. Very often, unfortunately, it is sort of tragedy and things falling apart that cause you to wake up. But equally, the right dosage of psychedelics proves to be extremely effective. So LSD, psilocybin, to some degree MDMA, have proven to be very, very precise and there's a chapter about that in Radical Brilliance, very precise methods of returning to your sanity. And, if obviously there's still some things being worked out about the legalization, but for example, LSD done with a guide, with a qualified guide, you can, with the right dosage, you can get to the point where you can just speak you can speak coherently for extended periods from that kind of soul level and completely reconnect with why you're on the planet. So there's lots of portals. I mean, there's many, I mean, going off in the wilderness, on a vision quest, there's ways you can play with time. You can use sort of hypnotic states to go back into what was true before you were born, or you can move forward in time and see life from your deathbed. I mean, I work with many, many, many different tools, but it's always to the end of helping people to wake up from the games they never chose consciously and to reconnect with the purpose that makes everything sing. Once you rediscover why you're here, you just have a natural spring in your step.
Yes, yes. Yes, and of course, I love all your tools, and of course, I use them with my clients, having trained with you in awakening coaching. And they are very magical. I'm interested in what you said, when you said about the microdosing, et cetera, because I don't think anybody else has talked about.
I didn't say microdosing.
No, didn't say microdosing. Sorry,
I didn't say microdosing. I said full dosing.
Full dosing. Okay.
Yeah, we're talking about microdosing for LSD would be 5 or 10 micrograms. I'm talking about 120 micrograms, which is not a microdose. Yeah. Sorry, carry on. Yeah.
Okay. Okay. So, I mean, you've given me a few things there that I think come in the category of, sort of energy secrets, which was the topic of this summit. In terms of, how people would maybe unwind or dismantle from the sort of like the prevailing game. And the other thing that occurs to me is about, it can take support to do that if everybody else is playing the game around you.
Of course. Yeah, of course. Yeah. I mean, I was just speaking with one of my clients yesterday, and I've been working with him now for 9 or 10 months. It's been, and I think yesterday was the first time that I really heard him say, like, oh my God, it's like, wow, I really feel like I'm waking up from a trance. We could have little glimpses of that, but he realized, like, wow, there is actually a completely different way to live on this planet. There is a totally different way of being here. Which is entirely purpose-driven, where each and every moment is purpose-driven. Each and every moment is driven by what is truly meaningful. And he just started to click, like, wow, there is a whole different way of being here, But yeah, what you said is true, that the collective conversation, the collective activity, it's all drawing you into, and it's nobody's fault. We're all caught in it together, even people with a lot of money and power and control, when you actually get down to it, they have equally been conditioned into participating in the game. So it is relatively rare. It's like the Matrix, it's relatively rare that somebody wakes up from the trance enough to go, oh my God, the actual invitation here as a human being is radically different than the one that is generally talked about. The invitation here, the thing that makes it all sing, has to do with contribution, not acquisition. You see, now the collective conversation is mostly about acquisition. What can you get for you? How can you get more than the other guy? How can you get a bigger house and a bigger car? And you can get all that, but often you feel like a dummy, because there you are in your huge house, feeling lonely and disconnected and meaningless, And I talk to people all the time who've, they've won at the game. They've exited from their startup with 50 million and they feel empty, On the other hand, there's nothing wrong with money. I mean, money is just a tool, more or less. It doesn't matter that much. So since more or less doesn't matter that much, you might as well have it. But what is actually really important is that you reconnect with the plot of your life, and the plot of your life has to come endogenously. there's no point in going to a channel for that, or, you know, reading tarot cards or blah, blah, blah. It has to come from deep within you, in a way that's sovereign.
Yeah. And what about like the people who have woken up in some way or had some sort of experience which has caused them to question, like whether that's like a bereavement or a near-death experience, or, you know, what we call a spiritual awakening, a kundalini rising, whatever, something that has an event that has caused them to experience the world differently for a period of time, and therefore question everything in their life, realize that some rearrangements have to be made. But you've got like the classic image, okay, you've been to the top of the mountain and now you have to come back and bring those things back down into a world which is operating in very different circumstances, and stay in touch.
Right. So can I give you a quick edit there? Just I'd like just to edit something you said.
Great.
I think you're familiar with this diagram, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So the quick edit is about the relationship between what we call spirituality, and so that the word, maybe it's a little bit misleading, because the word waking up is often used in a spiritual context. So-called spiritual context means you have a brief or abiding recognition of your true nature as limitless, right? In our conversation so far, I'm using waking up, meaning to realize how you're distracted in your activity and to realign your life with purpose, right? Yeah. So those two are not necessarily synonymous. And in fact, it's interesting because this is actually an error that I made for a long time. And I think, you know, one of my earlier books, Translucent Revolution, I emphasized the possibility that having a kind of spiritual awakening, like a kind of, you know, all the boundaries disappear and you realize that who you are is really infinite, you know, and connected to everything else. That I used to think that on its own was the one and only key to the kingdom, and that would take care of everything. I've realized now, just from pragmatic observation, that's not true. That many people have profound spiritual awakenings, but still in navigating the world, they continue to feel extremely lost and purposeless, right? Which is sometimes known as, what do they call it, a spiritual emergency, that you've had so having a very powerful spiritual awakening where you have this recognition of spaciousness, that can actually create even more of a gap of meaning, because now you've got this kind of meditative state you go into, which is infinite and still and blissful. And then you've got your life, which is still lacking meaning because you don't know why you're here, you see. So I think I think we've got to be careful that kind of, like you talked about Kundalini rising, for example. I see no evidence that a Kundalini rising experience is going to necessarily reconnect with you. I don't see any actual pragmatic evidence that makes any difference to what we're talking about here. It's a good thing to happen, but it's in another dimension, you know. So this diagram here, can I briefly explain this?
Oh yes, please. I think that would be really helpful.
So this is known as the Brilliance Cycle, and it's the essence of my most recent solo book. I've written other books with other people since then, but my most recent book that I wrote on my own is called Radical Brilliance, and it's about this cycle. So what the cycle explains is that brilliance means you become a shining light of contribution on the world. You're actually emanating evolutionary influence everywhere you go. You're actually become a conduit of evolution. It seems to involve 4 different elements. And if you take any of these 4 elements on their own, they have value, but they don't yield brilliance on their own. So one is, let's start here with the purple arrow. That is what you've called spirituality. So the purple arrow goes from a state of like, goes from a state of kind of localized humility. Like you feel small and vulnerable and a little lost, but you have a humility. there.
Mm-hmm.
And then through meditation or devotion, either one. Meditation will lead you back into yourself. Devotion will lead you into the recognition of a kind of divine intelligence in the world. It brings you into what you referred to as an awakening, which realistically for most people is going to be fleeting. You know, there is this kind of mythology of a permanent state of enlightenment. Personally, I think that's what's the word? A contrick, you know, played by old Indian men. I've never met anybody who has completely lost the localized sense, mm-hmm. Which includes preferences and concerns, mm-hmm. and everything. And, you know, and I've hung out with, you know, Eckhart Tolle and Byron Katie and everybody. It seems like the myth of complete transcendence of the localized self is, I would say, is a little bit, what's the word, like a, you know, when you try and sell somebody something, it's like a bit of a con trick, really, you know. Mm-hmm. But you can definitely puncture enough of a hole in the localized story that it's possible to access these super expansive states, like infinite states, yeah. And be able to come and go, and so the attention can come and go from there. So this opens up the next wave of the cycle, which is about, it's where little impulses start to arise, little tremoring impulses arise, but within an infinite field. So there's no doing in it. It's like hearing a very, very faint violin melody far away in another valley. You know, you can just faintly hear it. And so that's in Kashmiri Shaivism, they call that spanda. Spanda is this very, very subtle tremoring of energy, which is actually a function of the unified state. It's no longer, it's not yet become separate from its source. Or it's just, it's like a tremor within a field. And that builds in intensity until when we get here, it's not spiritual at all. This, I mean, it's not what we think of as spiritual. This is full on creativity. This is like jamming all night with the band, or, you know, automatic writing your novel, or, you know, or launching a product or whatever. This here is where you are completely taken over by a tsunami of creativity, but it's flowing through you very, very powerfully, right? Now, it's simply not true that everybody who has a spiritual awakening has this happen as a result. Not everybody who has spiritual experience becomes super creative. It requires the recognition of the whole cycle. One of the things that can happen here in this super heightened creativity, which is characteristic of a certain relationship between dopamine and serotonin. It's mostly dopamine driven, but it requires a certain element of serotonin as well. One of the things that can happen here is we have a particular kind of creative impulse, which is known as an intention. Now, an intention is a creative impulse, but it's creativity velcroed to a future state, right? And this initiates a whole new wave of the cycle, this blue arrow, which is where we set intentions to accomplish things in the future. And the way that we do that is very, very different. Now, you need to be able to set boundaries. You need to learn how to work within boundaries of money and time, how to make agreements and keep them. And it's there is absolutely the necessity of an individuated I, because the I is the one saying, I agree to do this. I give you my word, I will get it done. If you were to try and remain in a no me, nothing there, kind of non-dual Advaita state, you'd never get anything done. See, you have to show up as a me in order to actually be able to set intentions and keep them, right? So this blue arrow, this is, you know, a completely different world. This is no longer about spirituality or even about creativity. It's about productivity. And that's where books like this, you know, are relevant, like getting things done. There's a whole science to how to create results in the material world. If you stay in this, at the beginning, it's fueled in men more by testosterone, in women more by oxytocin and estrogen. But as you get closer to goals, there's a need to shut down a lot of your needs, like your emotional needs, the need to go to the bathroom, the need to go to sleep. A lot of these needs have to go offline. And the way we do that is by leaning heavily into the sympathetic nervous system, right? So in other words, your will, your get it done, your push through really blocks out any physical or emotional need. And that is characterized by running on norepinephrine, which is a neurotransmitter, and adrenaline and cortisol in the body. So once you reach a goal, once you actually get it done, we experience something called parasympathetic flooding, which means all the needs you've been pushing down suddenly come back to the surface. All the emotional needs, suddenly, instead of like feeling a little sleepy, you're absolutely exhausted, you know? And so this creates almost a kind of postpartum state with creativity. And you can see that when people accomplish amazing things, like they launch an album, or they launch a movie, or, you know, they launch a product, it's often followed by depression, because you get parasympathetic flooding, right? You feel like, you suddenly, everything you've pushed down, if this builds up too much, you actually have a nervous breakdown and you can't do anything for months. But this, whether it's mild or strong, this initiates the next part of the cycle, which is extremely important and very overlooked, which is where we have learning. So it moves from feelings of regret, remorse, shame, and guilt. All of those words get a bad rap in the new age spiritual woo-woo world. You should never have regret. You should never have shame. Never. Actually, I would say they're very healthy things to have, but not all the time, right? Like if you live in perpetual shame, it's toxic.
Yeah.
But if you make a mistake, you need to temporarily feel shame in your body to make sure you don't make the mistake again. Now, you're in England, right?
Yes.
But here in America, we just recently had a president who was incapable of feeling shame or remorse. And you saw the result. I mean, you look like an idiot, you know, because you can see what happens when someone is unable to inhabit this part of the cycle. They don't learn anything. They just remain in self-inflated self-aggrandizement, you know. So you need to have a part of the cycle where you can make mistakes and learn from them. And that returns you to humility, and humility starts the cycle again. So really, in order to be really brilliant, in order to really make a contribution that makes your life profoundly meaningful, it's not just about spiritual awakening. That is one part of this, but we need all of the parts of the cycle to be active in order to really live a life that has no regrets at the end of it.
Thank you so much. I love that cycle. I'm wondering if you'd just like to hold up a copy of your book so that the people listening can understand this is all in your Radical Brilliance book, if I'm correct.
Yeah, but actually I can't hold up a copy because before we started, I realized I don't have one left. I've got to order some more. So
I'm pretty, yes, and I have one, but it's on my bookshelf. I don't want to go to the next room.
But you could if you go to radicalbrilliance.com, a lot of this is explained there.
Yeah.
Radicalbrilliance.com. Yeah.
Right. So for the audience, that is where to go to hear more about Arjuna's work. Is there anything else you'd like to say, Arjuna, about how people can contact you, or anything else you'd like to offer about your work and people you work with?
Well, I don't know really. I think if this tweaks your interest, you can go look around Radical Brilliance. There's a podcast there. There's articles. There's a lot of stuff. It's all free, and I think there's even a little sort of sequence of videos you can go through that explains it all. You could check out the book, and the book has a lot of tools in it that explain how this works. And yeah, if this really deeply resonates for you, and you sense that you do have a purpose in your life that has not been fully realized, you can reach out and connect with me, and we can have a chat.
Lovely. Well, we'll put those links up that you've mentioned with your video, Arjuna. Thanks so much. That was, there's so many really helpful, interesting, useful, thought-provoking points there. So thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
You're welcome.